This production is brought to you by In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game.
Hello and welcome back to In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game. My name is Chris and welcome to another edition of the Dugout Debate, being recorded on Valentine's Day, and I've got the two loves of my life with me here.
I knew you were gay. I say this every time.
No homo. I said it.
I've heard Chris loves a tight bottom half.
I just didn't realise it was ours.
Delivering on that front. But anyway, we're here because we're lonely people, really. But anyway, Josh and Alex. Josh, the people's presenter, and Alex, the regular guest. How you doing, lads?
I am offended. I'm not offended at all.
You're just triggered.
I like my effort levels have gone down so much. I've worn a hat for the last two episodes, and my voice is gone, and I'm not even wearing my football shirt because my washing machine's broken. So, I mean, the fact that I'm still here at all is a miracle.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I think should we just get on with it?
Yeah.
Josh wants to be out of here.
I don't want to respond to the question, how are you, after the weekend's results, so...
Whereas if you were to ask me that question after we convincingly beat Birmingham City 2-0...
We aren't going to ask you that question because we don't really care about Villa, so yeah.
Don't care about...
As I've said...
This was a Premier League show.
You don't care about Villa and you don't care about me. So let's
essentially, couldn't put it better myself.
And for that very reason, I'm going to quickly segue to myself as I host the Picture This section. So thank you for that lovely segue, Chris. You're welcome, Chris. And
I want to kick you just for trying to copy me yet again. 2 weeks ago, Chris Fowler's quote exactly, I don't copy Josh. 14th February 2018, copies Josh. Anyway.
You're just trying to prolong this so that Alex doesn't make it to his whatever he's got to do.
I'm sure that would be the benefit to the football team anyway, so...
I'm shy. They'll probably benefit from me not being there.
Anyway, we're starting off, as we always do, with our Picture This round. So here we have a picture of Big Sam Allardyce and Roy Hodgson. So what's going on in this picture, lads?
I can kick us off. Is Roy Hodgson mirroring the reaction of League One Bible when we blocked him?
I was going to say, is Roy Hodgson the face of Chris and Josh, whilst League One Bible, aka Sam Allardyce, is collecting all the credit for the post that Chris and Josh have carefully crafted?
Yeah.
Or is Roy Hodgson mirroring Chris and Alex, and is Sam Allardyce me every time that I shut both of them down in the group chat?
By shut
us down, you mean kick us?
No, I mean... shut you down to the point that you can't respond because I've just completely
we can't respond because we're not in a chat.
Because I completely dominated you.
Calm
down, employees, calm down.
Right. So
neither of you are going to get Employee of the Month if you're not careful. It'll just go to me again.
To offer an answer. So, Josh, this is what you're doing.
I think it's time for you to go, Chris. Right, as you were saying, Alex.
This is what we mean by you cooking up. This is precisely what we're talking about.
Jesus Christ.
However, I cannot say anything because Roy Hodgson's face is my face when I am officially demoted to regular guest on the
What do you mean, when?
I already have been.
Demote you. You've given yourself this title.
Is it Pep Guardiola's reaction when Alexis Sanchez rejected him for the world's biggest club?
Yeah. I think it is.
I mean, Chris, when did Alexis Sanchez move to Barcelona?
No, he moved from Barcelona.
I
can't remember. I think you're a bit confused, Alex. I can understand coming from being a Liverpool fan and being ginger that you don't obviously follow the right train of thought from time to time. I understand. Don't worry.
Imagine being the world's biggest club and losing to Newcastle. Anyway,
imagine being England's second biggest club and losing to the two bottom teams in the country or in the league.
You know what, Josh? I'll take it from the second biggest club. I'll happily take that. But no, I was going to say is Sam Allardyce is Matt's attack collecting his Manager of the Month award, and Roy Hodgson is me, incredibly pissed off and jealous that I captained 4 goals Sergio Aguero and still came fucking third for the week. I'm so upset about that. I'm actually really triggered. As a side note, Matt, hi, can you just have a really shit week so that I could be comfortable in third? Just once. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Now, for £5 a month, you can sponsor a child just like Alex.
You can sponsor a special needs third place manager.
You can get him a parasol so he can finally go outside.
No, it's raining at the moment. I think I'm good.
Oh, we had snowing earlier. Anyway, I got one final suggestion. We've had a bit of a role reversal here. So Sam Allardyce is Hodgson and Hodgson is Sam Allardyce when Allardyce lost his job as England manager. And Hodgson's thinking, at least I'm not Allardyce. And Allardyce is thinking, oh, crap.
Well, see, I
think I'd rather be anyone than Hodgson.
Could it not be Hodgson just looking in envy at Sam Allardyce's 100% win record as England manager?
I knew you were going to reference that somehow.
I mean, sure, it makes sense, doesn't it?
But speaking of Sam Allardyce having a great win record, I'd be the first to suggest that the picture is actually Sam Allardyce celebrating a emphatic 3-1 win to his Everton side over West Brom.
Bravo for that segue. That was very, very well done.
I got you. Don't worry about it.
Everton managed to bounce back from their 5-1 thrashing at the Emirates by beating Crystal Palace 3-1, and we're going to go ahead and have a bit of a discussion about that game now.
Yes, so Everton beating Crystal Palace 3-1 at the weekend. It's, I don't know, maybe a slightly shocking result, depending on which way you looked at the match beforehand. Everton looking extremely strong against the Crystal Palace side that's had an incredible resurgence under Roy Hodgson, and Sam Allardyce prevailing in the battle of the former England managers. But first of all, obviously, mathematically, both can still go down to the Championship. But realistically, can you guys see either Everton or Crystal Palace being relegated at the end of this season?
I certainly can't. As much as I would love them to, for very obvious reasons, which I would normally point to my badge for, but I mean, I don't. I'm not currently wearing one. I can't see Everton going down. The quality of player they've got is too good for them to go down, in my opinion. I mean, they're sitting in the top. I know everything's so close, but they're sitting at the top half of the table at the moment. But I think with some of the signings they brought in, some of the players they've got back, I think we've said it before on this show, the main thing they were lacking was pace. It wasn't necessarily just quality. They were lacking a whole lot of pace, and especially in their defence, they're still lacking that. But going forward, they also had a problem going forward, and I think that's been not so much rectified, but that problem's been somewhat improved by the acquisition of Walcott, who's obviously got a bit of pace, the fact that Yannick Bolassi's returned from injury as well. And overall, when you combine, I know Walcott's not a world beater; he's still a young prospect. But when you combine the players that Everton do have, the likes of Walcott who can grab goals, the likes of Bolassi who can create chances, and Gylfi Sigurdsson who just is a quality player, it's difficult to see when you compare that kind of attacking impetus against some of the teams at the bottom table how Everton would really struggle to stay up. So I definitely can't see Everton staying up for a start.
Okay, and obviously talking
I definitely can't see them going down.
I was going to say.
That's what I was waiting for.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, we'll move on.
So
Allardyce and Hodgson have undoubtedly rejuvenated both of their sides since taking charge partway through this season. Taking probably the obvious contender, Pep Guardiola, out of it, do you think that they're both in the running for manager of the season? We'll go to you, Chris.
Quite possibly. I'd be more inclined to say that Roy Hodgson has a better chance than Sam Allardyce, because he took over a Palace side that had lost their opening 4 games and resultantly lost Frank de Boer just after 4 games, and they lost their first 3 games under Roy Hodgson. So a run of 7 defeats to start off the season pretty much condemned them from the off. But he's managed to claw back results. They went on a very good unbeaten run, if I remember rightly. I think it was perhaps 10 or 11 games. I can't remember. and they're now 15th, so he's obviously doing something right. He's made them far more defensively stable, and he's sort of playing the Crystal Palace way, which I think was Frank de Boer's main problem, trying to change the genetics of the club in just such a short amount of time, which just isn't going to work. And even though Palace now have been hit with some serious injury-wise, I think they've got about 10 senior players out injured. They will continue to struggle, but I think they will just about stay up, which I wasn't predicting at the start of the season when I said they'd finish 10th, but that's by the by. Given how close things are at the bottom, they may well still finish 10th, but well, yeah,
it's so close down there. Like it's entirely possible.
But anything can happen in this league, as we've seen with the likes of Leicester winning the title. Anything can happen.
Finally, sticking with Everton, do either of you think that they're going to stay in the top half of the table, or do you think that there are teams below them that may just creep up and Everton might suffer another large dip in form, as they did only very recently? That could see them obviously still very, very comfortably survive, but finish perhaps not as highly as their team theoretically should finish?
I think I'm looking at the table now, and the only two teams I could see possibly finishing above Everton based on the quality they have inside are Watford, who I don't think are a better side than Everton. I think they're put together better than Everton are, but I don't think they're a better side overall. And if they can get their act together, West Ham, because West Ham, when they've got all their best players fit, obviously Arnautovic coming back is huge for them. He came back last week, I believe, and got a goal. I'm not sure if Lanzini's back yet, but Lanzini's a huge miss for them. So when he comes back, I legitimately think West Ham are a better side than Everton. In which case, West Ham could finish above them, but then that would require Everton to then drop below Bournemouth, and I'm not sure if Bournemouth are a better side. They went through a good run recently, and then obviously suffered a bad result at the weekend. But I think Everton will finish top half. I think they're a good enough side, and I think that they were so far comfortably in 7th last season. And I don't think they're a much worse side than they were last season. Obviously, they've lost Romelu Lukaku, which is huge for them. But I don't think it makes a massive difference with regards to the league table as a whole. So I can see them finishing top half, personally.
Okay, any last words, Chris, before we move on?
Only really echoing what Alex has said. Big Sam has been able to completely change an Everton side that just looked bereft of confidence under Ronald Koeman. And it was essentially a team just full of number 10s. So he's been able to sort out some of those problems in terms of attacking impetus, like you said, Alex, in the transfer window, bringing in Theo Walcott. Cenk Tosun is still yet to hit the ground running at Goodison Park, but he's quite a physical striker, and I think you've said in the past, Alex, that physical strikers tend to do quite well in the Premier League. Apart from Kostas Mitroglou, like we said in that one debate.
Kostas Mitroglou was a great striker. It's the best thing Greece has ever produced. How dare you?
If you say so. But my only real concern with regards to Everton is why they decided to bring in Mangala on a loan. But he's won trophies at Man City. I think he won the League Cup while he was there.
I think you mean person Gula.
Oh dear, we're already SJW bashing again. Love it, but yeah,
Canada, boys. Canada.
They have better centre back options, and I actually think that Mangala is now injured, which is probably a plus for Everton. But that's. They'll easily get a top half finish, I reckon.
Okay, well, obviously, time will tell. Moving on now to Alex for the latest update on our fantasy teams.
So yes, thank you very much for that segue, Josh. And we are going to talk, as usual, about our fantasy I team and the updates to the table. And in a week in the Premier League with a lot of very big score lines and some players getting some massive scores on I-Team and performing incredibly well, there's a lot of scope for some very high scores in the league this week. And as a result, there were some very high scores in the league this week, with actually all three of us on the show having particularly decent weeks. But but I'll let Josh and Chris tell you about how they did specifically themselves. Firstly, with Chris. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about how your I-team went this week?
Well, I only made one substitution ahead of the game week, and that was bringing in Phil Jones in defence for Monreal. I think it wasn't Monreal. It was some other Arsenal defender. I can't remember. And yeah, that didn't work out well. Neither did David De Gea in goal. Really, I should have taken a punt on Dubravka by the amount of saves he was making. Goodness me. Azpilicueta making up for Chelsea's recent dip in form with that clean sheet against West Brom, and Davinson Sanchez as well, another clean sheet against who was Spurs playing? I can't remember. Arsenal, yeah, of course. It was that dull of a North London. It was that dull of a North London derby. I'd forgotten.
He's too busy crewing himself over the second City derby. He's forgotten about the actual derby that matters.
What? Well, it's not my. I was on cloud 9 when we won that game. It's not my fault.
Oh dear.
Elsewhere across my team, it's all the same. Kevin De Bruyne is still performing superbly, and as well as Mo Salah, Dele Alli, Heung-min Son, and Mr. Pascal still hanging on in there, occasionally picking up a goal or an assist. And then the captain choice of Aguero really worked out well with his cushy 4 goals.
I was going to say, it's not bad, that, is it?
Yeah, and then Harry Kane as well, just superb, especially in Spurs' draw away at Juventus yesterday as well, helping to inspire them to come back from 2 goals down. So yeah, he's well on course to potentially get a 3rd consecutive Golden Boot. So yeah, he's still in the team.
Brilliant, good stuff. And Josh, you also had a very decent week, finishing in 4th place overall in our league this week. How did you
well, I think actually out of the 3 of us, considering the last months that we've had, I think that I probably had the best month in terms of relativity and in terms of what it means for the league going on. So yeah, I had Petr Cech in goal, who luckily only conceded the once against Spurs. I was predicting a few more. That's what I captained Harry Kane for the sole reason I was expecting Arsenal or Spurs to concede more than they did. So yeah, I might as well mention him. Harry Kane scored once, captained him, so 14 points there. Sergio Aguero got me 4 goals up front as well, but I didn't captain him, so only 22 points, but I can't really complain too much about that. Back up to the defence, so we've got still the 3 Chelsea defenders in there. I took out Alonso because I don't think he was playing. So Gary Cahill only came on as a second half sub, so I only got 1 point for him. Victor Moses, when the 1 week I captain him, he concedes 4 goals. The week I don't captain, but I still got him in the team. He scores and keeps a clean sheet. So it wasn't such a bad idea after all to captain him when you think about it. It wasn't. Stranger things have been done. So yeah, again, I think that was probably one of the most inspired choices of the week. From the 3 of us, and obviously Azpilicueta, as Chris said, getting a clean sheet. Otamendi, City conceded, did they not?
They did.
Yeah. De Bruyne, I think, got 3 assists in that demolition, so I got a good 11 points from him. Eriksen, Son and Dele Alli not doing much for me, really. I brought Eriksen in for Alonso, if I remember correctly, and it didn't really do much there. Mo Salah, I can't remember. Did he score as well? Did he score twice? He nearly did. I've lost track.
No, just one.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it's been so long. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, pretty good week for me. Yeah. So I'm still sitting rather pretty at the top. Perhaps the lead isn't as big as it once was, but it's still a pretty. If you think about think about the university lecturers complaining about their pensions have gone from very, very good to very good, and I think my lead's gone from very, very good to very good. So, make it. Only if I drop out from first. I think bringing in some relevance into it. I don't have too many complaints in this week. There wasn't much more I could have done. I think my tactics worked well, and that's all I have to say about that, really.
Yeah, realistically, you were the choice of captaining your other striker away from the top. So a very decent week for you. With regards to my team, I came third, I believe, this week, as I was moaning earlier about, because, like Chris, I also captained Aguero, which turned out to be an inspired choice, thankfully. He scored 4 goals, as Chris already mentioned. My other striker, I believe I had Harry Kane, and then I was torn between bringing in Firmino and Lukaku, and ended up bringing in Lukaku in the end, who did absolutely jack diddly shit. So,
that means he did nothing.
Yeah, so I that wasn't a particularly inspired choice by myself. I had 3 other Manchester United players in my squad. I had Pogba, Valencia and Jones, obviously none of whom did anything for me, which was great. Thank you, Manchester United, for that. In terms of other players that actually did all right for me, I had Eden Hazard, who grabbed a couple of goals for Chelsea, which he's got a few goals recently. I believe just something like Chelsea's last 6 goals have all been Hazard or Moses, which is an interesting one, but he seems to be doing all right for me at the moment. I had Raheem Sterling for City, who I believe grabbed City's first goal before I got the other 4. Sadio Mane didn't do anything for Liverpool apart from show up. Mo Salah got a goal and assist. And then the only other 2 players left were my other defender and my goalkeeper, which were Laporte and Edison, who, as Josh already mentioned, didn't keep clean sheets, so didn't do too much for me there. So the big bulk of my points realistically came from just Sergio Aguero signed sharp in the second half of his game. But I believe that does round off the Fantasy League for now with regards to the overall standings. Obviously, Josh is still in first on 1,619 points, Chris in second on 1,543, and me rounding up the 3 of us with 1,524. But obviously, we'll come back next week and we will keep you guys updated with how the league's shaping up. Because it looks like with a lot of the big teams playing each other, and obviously the 3 of us having a lot of the big teams players in our squads, that it could be a very interesting week for the dynamic of the table overall. So we'll come back next week and let you know how that goes for us all. But for now, that rounds off the Fantasy iTeam section. And I'm going to throw it back over to Chris for our phrase of the week.
So yes, thank you, Alex. And now we'll just get straight on to our phrase of the week, which this week is "Today it wasn't there." So lads, what could this phrase mean?
Is it the Marks?
Josh, want to kick us off?
Yes, I think. Is it the Marks and Spencer? Is it the Marks and Spencer's shoppers version of "Sit It Bangs, Bang and the Dirt Is Gone"?
That's the thing about this question.
Bit long-winded to get there. You had to start it 3 times, but
yeah, not quite my fault, really.
I blame my internet technically. No, mine's far more lowbrow than that. Mine's far more below the belt. Today it wasn't there. Is that Kate and Jerry trying to describe their incident to the Portuguese police?
No. Is that suggesting that Madeleine was non-binary?
Who knows?
Or are they referring to Cuddle Cat? I don't know.
Oh my god.
Is it how League One Bible reacted when he tried to steal one of our posts but found out that we'd blocked him on Instagram?
Don't you mean today it wasn't there?
Yeah.
It wasn't there. It wasn't there. Is that me describing my will to live in the future when Mohamed Salah inevitably leaves Liverpool for Real Madrid or Barcelona?
Yeah.
Because it is going to happen.
Yeah.
Is it what I said to myself when I was looking at the Premier League table in August 2016 and tried to find Aston Villa?
Not just today that it wasn't there. It wasn't there yesterday. It won't be there tomorrow.
Hey Chris, this time next year though, you might
We'll
be okay.
there come June. Don't worry. Hopefully.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
It wasn't there. Is that the phrase that you two have to use to describe my contribution to the In the Dugout YouTube channel and Instagram page
and
Facebook page?
Again, not just today.
Is it what I said to myself again when I was looking up the list of Premier League winners and trying to find Liverpool?
Oh, come on. I thought we were going to get 1 week. 1 week.
If I go for Chris, I have to go for you as well. It's only fair. I treat all of my employees equally.
Except you don't pay us.
Yeah, this is unpaid.
All right then. My volunteers. If you want to go like that.
Oh, so you're a charity now?
Well, not Oxfam.
Guys. No, it wasn't there. That is, of course, Eddie Howe lamenting his Bournemouth side's 4-1 loss to Huddersfield.
That's correct. It was a pretty good win for Huddersfield, getting their first points of 2018 on the board. And again, I'm going to pass back to Josh for a discussion on their performance.
Yes, thank you again, Chris. So, Huddersfield absolutely battering what we thought were a quite informed side in Eddie Howe's Bournemouth. But obviously, as I just said, Bournemouth had a good string of results up until this demolition at the hands of Huddersfield. A bit similar to what I asked you about Everton. Bournemouth currently are in 10th. Can you guys see the Cherries staying in the top half of the table come May?
You want to take this, Chris?
I mean, it's sort of just echoing what we've already said about Everton. I mean, Bournemouth they had a really poor start, similarly to Crystal Palace, but then they've managed to claw some good results together, and now they're up in the top half of the table. So it just shows how quickly the table can change at a moment's notice. Bournemouth managed to get a top half finish last season. As we saw, they finished 9th, which was, let's be honest, pretty unprecedented. But it just goes to show how Eddie Howe is a fantastic man manager, and he gets his tactics more often than not pretty much spot on. So I don't think Bournemouth should really be worried about relegation unless they suffer a series of serious injuries, similarly to what Palace have at the moment.
Touching on what Chris said about Eddie Howe, Alex, do you think that Eddie Howe is ready for a bigger club, or would you quite like to see him stay at Bournemouth and build something of a legacy, similarly to what Sean Dyche is achieving at Burnley, that he's maybe resisted the chance to join a bigger club and has just strengthened and almost gone into club folklore?
I think that firstly, I think that Eddie Howe could leave Bournemouth tomorrow and he'd have a legacy. I mean, he's dragged them up the leagues and has managed to drag them from, I think he joined them maybe when they were in League One, and he's now got them to a point where they're a very solid mid-table Premier League side. So, yeah, I think he'll have a legacy regardless of what he does. With regards to moving to a bigger club, it's interesting. I'm kind of torn on this because I want to see how far he can take it. Because the reality is, I think Bournemouth have reached their ceiling. I don't think it gets better for them. I can't see them getting any better and challenging for those top sort of 6 spots, those top 4 spots or anything. Because I think that every team that's not in the top 6 is so far off the top 6 at this point that Bournemouth might be sitting in 9th, and sure, that's only 3 places off Arsenal, but Bournemouth are nowhere near the quality that Arsenal are, and I don't see them getting there. So, on one hand, Eddie Howe, the only thing Eddie Howe's going to achieve at Bournemouth now is maintenance. I don't think it gets better, so I think it'd be interesting to see him at a bigger team. But on the other hand, I very much have a soft spot for Bournemouth, so I think there's a bit of personal bias with me not wanting him to leave, because I'm not sure if there's another manager who could come to Bournemouth and actually do a better job than him. But I think it would be interesting to see how he fared that I think could progress more than Bournemouth, because, like I say, I don't see Bournemouth getting any better than they are.
And moving on to, obviously, the victors of that match, Huddersfield, they are set in 17th. There's not a lot of points difference between, I think it's about 10th and bottom, as Chris once said, a tight bottom half. But most of the other teams, with the exception of 2 in that bottom sort of 10, have experience in the relegation battle in Premier League fighting for survival. Do you think, especially Huddersfield, that their inexperience, both manager, player and club, in battling for survival may end up costing them their place in the Premier League?
I have to say, I think Huddersfield will go down, because when you look at the teams below Huddersfield, you've got West Brom, you've got Stoke, and you've got Southampton. Out of those, the only one that I am confident will go down is West Brom. I'm pretty confident West Brom will go down, but Stoke tend to find a way to claw themselves up to about 14th or 15th almost every season without fail, and I don't see why this season would be any different. And Southampton, I haven't been impressed with them this season, but I find it very hard to believe that Southampton will go down. I think that Mauricio Pellegrino has taken on a bit of a poison chalice. It was only so long that Southampton would be able to go on selling all their best players and being able to replace them. That being said, they still have Premier League quality in that side, and should Charlie Austin return for the sort of last 7 games of the season or so, I think his goals will be able to make a massive difference to that Southampton side and claw them back to survival relegation, which leaves Huddersfield. And I don't see Huddersfield as being any better than any other team in the league. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far to say that they're the weakest team in the league. And when you look at their players, you look through their squad, and the only player that I look at in that squad and think they're a genuinely good player is Aaron Moy.
Tom
They have
Ince.
nothing particular. He's not in your fantasy team anymore, Josh. You don't have to defend him. But no, they have nothing particularly going forward, and they really don't have any particular quality at the back. And like you say, having not had any experience of a Premier League relegation battle, I think they're really going to struggle, and I think they're a very, very, very good bet for a team to go down.
Okay, and Chris, your thoughts on that?
I just look at some stats. Huddersfield scored more goals against Bournemouth in this one game than they managed in the last 8 Premier League matches combined. So over those 8 games, they'd only scored 3. So I feel like Huddersfield's main problem is just finding a consistent outlet of goals. Steve Mounier, I believe, is their top scorer at the moment, and he scored a goal on the day and was ruled a sec because it was recorded as a Steve Cook own goal. Fortunately for Alex, given that he doesn't have him in his IT war. And just, as you were saying, Aaron Moy has been like a driving force in midfield, but he actually went injured. I believe he was taken off on a stretcher, so that is not at all good for Huddersfield. And as for any of the goals, I mean, Richie Van der Paris scoring from the penalty spot, and Pritchard scoring within the first minute. I mean, he's a new signing. They only from Norwich. I believe he's had too much Premier League experience, being may well have been relegated with the same season we went on. But he's able to replace Aaron Moy while he's in sort of scoring, then fair enough. Like you said, Huddersfield really goes to be scoring far too many more, not too solid defensively, and again, just not really looking like they can survive at all, really.
Okay, I just want to apologise. I think there's a bit of an internet connection mishap, so I don't think everything that you've said may quite have been heard by our viewer. But either way, we're going to move on now. This week, with the FA Cup games happening this weekend, we won't be doing any predictions, so there's not really much point in discussing our predictions for the next game week in the Premier League until next week's episode. However, we are still going to move back to Chris as he introduces us to this week's Dugout Debate.
So yes, we're going to round off the show as we always do with the Dugout Debate, like the name of the show would suggest. And this week, since the Champions League has now returned to our televisions once again, with the knockout stages, we're going to be debating whether or not the Champions League should just be for league champions of European leagues, just like it used to be back in the days of, I believe, while it was still called the European Cup. Yeah, I'm going to come over to you first, Josh. Where do you fall with regards to this argument?
Oh, I firmly believe that it should just be for the champions of the European leagues. I think the clue should be, and it's not, but it should be in the name Champions League. I don't quite see how teams that finish second, third, and fourth can be in any competition that has the word champions in it. Oh, championship excluded. Furthermore, I think that it encourages complacency. Obviously, being a United fan, I've had to experience that in recent years. Arsenal fans have had that for the last decade. Liverpool fans for the last 2 decades. That second, third, and fourth is good enough. It's not good enough, and I think that has only encouraged this mentality that it's not really the winning that matters. It's just qualifying for the Champions League year in, year out that is important, and it's almost winning the league in some cases comes secondary. I mean, look at Tottenham, for example. they had this very, very strange cycle of qualifying for the Champions League, not really caring about the Champions League, and then focusing on qualifying for next season's Champions League. And I think that's also a very, very odd system to get into. Finally, I think that if we did just have the champions of the European leagues, then it would encourage more, or give the opportunity for more of the lesser nations to have their champions in the Champions League and not in the Europa League. I know Macedonia, Malta, all these just completely obscure countries, their statuses within UEFA and within European football would be elevated. There'd be more money going into these countries, going into these football clubs with television revenue and so on. So I think that by encouraging the lower teams in place of second, third and fourth place teams in the higher domestic leagues, and it can only really be beneficial. I can't see any drawbacks to that, really.
Okay, and Alex, I believe you fall on the other side of the fence, so would you like to...
I do indeed. Yeah, so I think a lot of my logic for being on the other side of this is that I believe that I'm not denying that some of the problems that Josh has put forward exist and that that having just the champions would be some kind of solution to it. But I believe that doing so would cause more problems than it would solve. And my first thing about this is the fact that from a entertainment perspective, partially, from the perspective of, let's say, we've got this exact season with the exact situation that it's in. Manchester City have won the Premier League. So, and we still have 11 games left. There's no doubt that Manchester City are going to win. What the rest of the season is effectively pointless now if we're only having the Champions, because what possible reason do Liverpool, Manchester United, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea have for putting any effort into the rest of the season, because Manchester City have run away with it so easily? I think that would create a massive problem with regards to competitiveness within the leagues. Obviously, if you've got a closer league and a closer fought title race, then that is something that negates this problem. But in leagues like England, where Manchester City are so dominant, in leagues like Spain, where Barcelona are so dominant, in leagues like both Liga and the Bundesliga, where PSG and Bayern Munich are so dominant, we don't have competitive title races at this point. At the moment, a lot of the best that a lot of genuinely quite big teams can hope for is Champions League football. And I think it would come as a massive negative to those kind of teams if their ability to try and compete for Champions League football was taken away. Furthermore, if you only have the champions of the respective nations playing in this sort of Champions League, then I believe that makes the Champions League significantly less prestigious, because I understand the point that it will drive more money towards things like the Macedonian League or the Norwegian League or whatever, or the Estrelaska or whatever. But the reality of the situation is that the champions of those leagues are far less prestigious clubs, far less followed, popular, and high-quality clubs than the likes of the clubs that come second, third, and fourth in the big leagues, the likes of, I don't know, Borussia Dortmund, Napoli, Manchester United, Liverpool, Spurs. Those kind of teams are much bigger, and I think the Champions League will just become a league that is only ever won by the likes of Barcelona or the likes of Manchester City, because they're not going to have as much competition in it. So that makes the Champions League significantly less interesting. And furthermore, it creates a dynamic which is very difficult, because then what do you do with the Europa League? Can people qualify for the Champions League by winning the Europa League? Is that allowed because they're not champions of their clubs? There's a whole host of issues you would have to solve if you decide to change Champions League to this format, which I can go into more detail later, but I've rambled on my introductory spiel for far too long, so I'll pass it back over to you, Chris.
Well, I fall on the same side of the coin as Josh. I think it should just be exclusively for champions of each league across Europe, because I've just had a quick look. Since it was rebranded as the Champions League in 1992, ever since then, the team that has gone on to win the trophy, only two of the finals have we had winners from outside Europe's top 5 leagues, those being Ajax in 95 and Porto in 2004. So, and before then, the last team to win it from outside a big league was Red Star Belgrade back in 91. So, I mean, it's clear that there is a sort of domination from the big 5 leagues, and I can't remember off the top of my head how many of those teams that had won in that time were actually genuine champions, or had they finished second, third, fourth, I don't recall. But then you've got, for example, you've got Liverpool, who won it infamously back in 2005 in Istanbul. They hadn't won the league, but still won the cup. But the reason that I think it should just be for the champions is similarly to Josh. I feel like it sort of devalues the competition, in that you can have a team that wins the league that hasn't won their domestic trophy the prior season. And the reason that you don't see the likes of these teams, like you said, in the Polish league, which was I can't pronounce the name. The reason you don't really see them do so well, and the reason that they aren't as of higher quality, is because they don't end up in the Champions League, and they don't have that revenue to be able to invest in their squad, for example, improve their academy, improve their system overall. So there is a massive gap in this quality. But yeah, I think that it would be far more fair if there were teams that had won their domestic trophies actually went on to compete in the Champions League. Like in Scotland, for example, we know that Celtic tend almost definitely win the league all the time, but then they still have to go to the trouble of going straight into the qualifying rounds of the Champions League, as opposed to having a booked spot there. So it just seems a bit tedious to have to force these extra games upon them for winning that, even though they've won their domestic title.
I just want to build on, I think it was Alex's first point, or sort of a solution to the problem that you saw possibly happening, in that the teams that have got nothing left to fight for, I suppose, in your words, for the end of the season, if they weren't in the Champions League, then there would be nothing for them. It's a solution to that problem not to reintroduce, firstly, the Cup Winners' Cup, so therefore the teams that would win the FA Cup and the League Cup that weren't the league champions would play in this Cup Winners' Cup. So it's the same qualification that they get to the Europa League, but how it used to be, where there'd be a separate tournament for all the domestic cup winners, and then the teams that play second, third and fourth could then play in the Europa League. And then I also think it's a bit bizarre, as a different argument altogether, that fifth, sixth and seventh are in a European competition. I think that second, third and fourth should be playing in a secondary European competition if we have to have one. But also, building slightly more on what Chris said, I think that a bit like, let's use Celtic and Scotland as an example. If you were, I think, England had 5 teams, obviously with United winning the Europa League last season. England had 5 teams. I don't think that the Europa League winners should be in the Champions League. But secondly, I think that, but if you automatically just leave the English champions and no other English teams, that frees up 3 other spots for 3 other countries. And as Chris said, maybe Celtic, maybe some other country that otherwise wouldn't get a chance at the big time. And I think instead of it lowering the prestige, I think it would instead of it lowering the prestige of the tournament, as Chris said, I think it would significantly increase the prestige of all the other teams in it, and that in itself would increase the prestige of the Champions League. You would be the champion of champions, and not the champion of 1 to 4. And I think, from my personal point of view, being the champion of champions is far more prestigious than being the champion of teams placed first or fourth. And a final point, and I'm not sure if this is what Chris was alluding to when he said that I think it was only twice in the last 2.5 decades that a team...
Twice since it was renamed the Champions League.
Yeah, in the last 2.5 decades that a team outside the top 5 big leagues hasn't... only twice it happened that they've won the Champions League. So that kind of makes, Alex, your point about the fact that only teams like Barcelona and like the cream of the teams are going to be dominating, because they dominate it anyway. So whether we reduce the amount of teams or not, there's still going to be those top teams from those nations fighting ultimately at the latter stages of the tournament. So I don't really think that either of those problems are without solution.
See, my issue is that I think it would only increase the problem of having, like, the best way I can put it is dynastic teams, in the sense of teams that consistently win the league over and over again. Because let's say because it's not like we're implementing this from scratch and starting totally again. Let's say we implemented it next season in the current football climate that we're in. because the point you're making is that I'm not denying it would possibly make clubs from smaller leagues a little bit more prestigious than they are, but the reality is that if you're a big name football, if you're Lewandowski or Neymar or something like that, and you're like, I really want Champions League football, then you're not going to go, I'm going to go to Skopje's finest team. You're going to go, well, I'm still just going to go to Real or PSG or Bayern or whoever or Manchester City. I think it creates scope for those teams to be even more dynastic than they already are. And hypothetically, let's say that we implemented it next season, and let's take Manchester City as an example, already quite dominant in the English league. Then they're the only team in the Champions League, the only team that any players really want to transfer to because players want to play in the Champions League. And that means that Manchester City, because they happen to be the team that started off in the Champions League, are just going to make it far easier for them to get even stronger in comparison to all the teams below them because they're the only team that people want to play for, because they're the only team that are getting Champions League football. I think that creates a problem with regards to dynasty. And I think you're overestimating the amount of players who, in order to play in this Champions League competition, which in my opinion would be less prestigious, because, like I say, you're playing against far more weak teams than you were previously. People aren't suddenly going to want to start playing in the Polish league because that means they get Champions League football as well. Because for the entirety of the regular season, they're still playing against crappy Polish teams. So I don't think it solves the problem of prestige for smaller teams particularly at all, because it's not like loads of big players are going to move there. It's not like they're going to get particularly far in the competition because, sure, they might get to the last 16 or quarter-final, but as soon as, like I say, Poland's finest come up against Real Madrid or Barcelona, more likely this season, or any of the big teams, they're going out like that. It doesn't make a difference. People aren't going to move to them just for the sake of playing in this competition and going out in the quarterfinals. I think the issues that you raised about clubs like Spurs just going into Champions League just for the sake of being in the Champions League for financial incentives, something that Arsenal have been criticised for, is a problem, and I totally agree with that. But I think that the financial incentive of the Champions League in comparison to all the other domestic leagues is more of a cause of that problem than the Champions League system itself.
I want to respond to that. Who was in the summer of 2016? Who became the world's most expensive player?
In summer 2016?
Yeah.
Pogba?
Yeah, which side did he join?
Manchester United.
Which European competition were they in that season?
Europa League.
There we go. I don't think that not being in the Champions League.
But he joined after.
We'd been in and out of the Champions League for the last 3 or 4 years. I don't think that being in the Champions League necessarily means that only big players are going to want to go to teams that season. And what's more, with competitions like the Premier League, I think the Premier League is a very unique in that certainly since 2012 it's since United won it 3 times in a row in 2006, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9 that no team has won it twice in a row. So in regards to that, it would be a different team representing England in the Champions League every season. I don't think that you need to be a high profile. Sorry, I don't think you need to be a Champions League club to attract the top players. Arsenal have just signed Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who are Dortmund still in the Champions League or are they in the Europa League?
Yeah, no, they're in the Europa League now.
So obviously no one can deny that Aubameyang is a world-class player. I think that overall, if a player is going to join a big club, he's going to do that. I think the mission should be more to help that club get into the Champions League as opposed to just wanting an easy pass into the big league. And I think that mirrors or sort of is identical to the problems with clubs, that it encourages mediocrity, that they are happy to play for a 4th place team as long as they're getting into the Champions League group stages every season. I think that we should be continuously striving to be the best, and I think let's just say Aubameyang has joined Arsenal, even though they're in the Europa League. Let's just say he has joined them with the prospect of Champions League football. Let's say they get 4th. I don't think any player should be joining a club just to finish 4th and get into the group stage of the Champions League. Each big player should be joining a club with the prospect of winning trophies and winning the Champions League.
Okay, so a couple of problems I take with that. Firstly, I take problem with the 2 examples you've given. I appreciate that Pogba joined from Juve, a club that was challenging for the Champions League, and I appreciate that, and he joined Manchester United, who are in the Europa League. But Manchester United are an anomaly because I know you say they've been in and out of the Champions League for a few seasons, but they are the biggest club, possibly apart from Real Madrid, the biggest club in world football. So most other clubs that are that were sitting in the Europa League would not have the pool that Manchester United had. There's absolutely no way that a Paul Pogba would have joined. Even you said Liverpool earlier, the second biggest club in England. There is no way Paul Pogba would have joined a club like Liverpool if we were sitting in the Europa League spots. Manchester United are an anomaly, and I think Paul Pogba's transfer from Juve back to Manchester United was also an anomaly. And with regards to Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, I think that Dortmund, like you say, also a club that's potentially looking at Europa League football at the moment. They're not the best. They're far from the best club in Germany at the moment, and they're a club that's currently at the moment going backwards as opposed to forwards. And I don't think that moving to Arsenal was by any means a step down, regardless of whether he's moving to a Europa League side, because Arsenal are still a side that generally tend to challenge for Champions League football. The other issue that I take with something you said was that you talked about clubs being rewarded for mediocrity. So obviously coming fourth gets you into Champions League qualification stage, and that's mediocre. For me, I don't understand why finishing second, third, or fourth in one of the toughest leagues warrants any less merit than going through and winning a Winners' Cup competition. For me, maintaining a high level of performance in a very difficult league over the course of a 38-game season, if anything, warrants more merit than being able to go through a cup competition and a Cup Winners' Cup, in which the draws are largely totally random and you could just get a very easy route to the final. Because there's far more scope for that there is in the Premier League, where it's fair, everyone does the same thing. So I don't see why it is that your solution of having a Cup Winners' Cup would be any less rewarding of quote-unquote mediocrity than finishing second, third or fourth, which I don't think is mediocre at all.
I'm conscious to let Chris speak. I just want to respond to your response to my points. On your last point, first of all, who finished second last season?
God, you're testing me now. I have absolutely no idea. I can't remember.
Pardon?
Tottenham.
Yeah. How many trophies did they win?
0.
Where did United finish?
Oh, but don't get started on United's fucking Europa League and no one cares.
No, I don't think that's relevant whether anyone cares or not. The point is, United are thought to have had a better season than Tottenham because they won 2 trophies, and I think it's just a very, very negative approach in football in general terms, that finishing second and winning no trophies is the equivalent, or even in some cases better, to winning a trophy. But also, you're saying that United is an anomaly. That may be so, but I think that, especially in England, if you want to bring up anomalies, I think England in itself is an anomaly. I think that probably the top 8 clubs in England are bigger than most countries' second teams and below. So I think that England as a whole, I think Liverpool, because they've not been at the top of their game for, let's say, decades, really, excluding the
20 years, yeah.
So I think if you wanted to bring in anomalies, I think using Liverpool as an example to contrast the fact that that United is a big pull, I'm not quite sure that works. I think maybe, let's just say Chelsea finish outside the top 4 this season. I don't think they're going to have any problems in attracting the biggest players, primarily because they've got the financial clout to support them. Likewise with many of the top teams, even if United were to finish outside the top 4, if even, let's just say, in some magical mystery land that Man City managed to finish outside the top 4, are you trying to tell me that they're not going to attract the top players next season with the amount of money they have in their bank account? I think they absolutely will be still signing the top players, but I think it's probably time to let Chris speak.
Yes. I was going to
say, I'll respond to that in a second.
Following on from that, I feel like the idea of having just one top spot that guarantees you Champions League football, I think that is a bigger incentive to do better at a specific club that maybe hasn't finished at the top of the game in their domestic league. I think it's a better incentive for them to do better at that club, and of course that factoring in other areas that attract players to clubs. You've got the likes of financial income, you've got the likes of history, you've got location. There's far more aspects to moving to a certain club just than the prospect of Champions League football.
Okay, so to respond to a couple of those, I'll respond to Chris first. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was he said. Oh yeah, with regards to a player playing better for a club because they want to get Champions League football, I don't really see why that's a particularly relevant point. I think players tend to give their best so teams can succeed the majority of the time anyway. I don't see why players would suddenly find this next gear of effort because of this other competition. I think players tend to give their best regardless. Remind me what his second point was again. Sorry, I was trying to keep Josh's points in my head as well. Fucking brilliant.
Josh said everything I've got to say.
I'm sorry, I did have a response to your second point. I'm really sorry, but I can't remember what it was because I was trying to keep Josh's points in my head as well.
It was more about how there's more than just the prospect of Champions League football that attracts.
Yes, you're right. That was the point. So, a couple of those. One of the things you mentioned was history. I honestly don't think players give that much of a fuck about history, to be honest. I think they care about whether a club's big, and I know that history factors into that to some extent, but players are all about what they can achieve going forward. I don't think a player would want to move to Nottingham Forest because they've won a couple of Champions Leagues in the past. Like, no, they don't care. But I think with regards to money and things like that, if you're talking about a competition, if you're talking about it now, you're saying, oh, all these other clubs have massive financial backing as well, but they've got massive financial backing because partly in some cases because of the owners and partly in some cases because of achieving, certain placements in European competitions.
Well, I think in Man City's case, it's solely because of their owners. They've only won 2 league titles since they took over 10 years ago. I think they've won an FA Cup and a League Cup since then, and that's it. So I think it's not really prize money that's got them where they are financially.
But fair enough. But I also think that there are far less players that are entirely money driven than there are players that are driven by a hunger for success and trophies. And I think that if Manchester City are the only team in England who, because of what I believe to be this thing where you create a dynasty where it's very difficult for any team to displace the one team in the country that's in the Champions League, although there'd be a second one I accept because of the Cup Winners' Cup, it'd be very difficult for any team to displace those 2 teams. And as a result, I think that there are many more players, like I say, that are interested in success than money. And I think that all the players would still massively flood to the team that achieved more success than the team that achieved more, the team that had some financial backing. And I appreciate you guys might completely disagree with that, but like when Manchester City were taken over, yes, they weren't in a great position, but you could see that, they've had this £1 billion pound takeover, and that when in negotiations with players, they're like, we're going to sign this and this and this. So it's a project that's going to grow. So I don't know. I just don't see how it is that I just don't see how it is that a dynasty would not be created by these bigger teams and make it incredibly difficult for us to see any diversity in that new Champions League format than we have now. And like I say, other reasons, like I think the competition would be less interesting. I really don't think players would move to smaller leagues just because it's more prestigious. I just don't see how the system would work in general.
I don't think there's ever been... I certainly didn't make the argument that big players would be moving to teams in more obscure countries. I just said that their profiles across the continent would be raised and they would have more money to invest in things like infrastructure and increasing their stadium capacity.
As well.
I don't think that neither Chris nor I made the argument that suddenly Lionel Messi is going to start making his move to, like, I don't know, Legia Warsaw or something. Like we're not saying that. We're just saying that it's gonna, just like English football. Forget the top, like the world-class players that come to this country. In this country, we have one of the, if not the best, academy systems in the world. Probably Barcelona, Spain, France amongst that. It would give these other countries and these other clubs the opportunity to try and emulate these other countries with these high-profile academies and the way that they encourage football and the way that they have a higher standard of playing football. I don't think that Poland, for example, to use Poland as an example, ever had as high a standard of football as England. There's no reason why they can't aspire to that. I think financially that might be a reason why they haven't in the past, but I think if they were to get into the Champions League, obviously with all the different sponsorships, with them being broadcast all around the world, being seen by however 100 million people per season, and obviously the chance of playing the teams like Barcelona and Manchester United and the like, I don't see any negatives, and if there are any negatives to that, I think that they're completely outweighed by any positives that would arise from it.
Just as a sort of rounding off point, I also think that sort of prospect of playing against bigger teams, it might also help from a scouting point of view, because you'll be able to see some of these players playing in other parts of the world that you perhaps might not have thought about signing. They might be these so-called hidden gems that you can find at certain tournaments. But we are pushing almost just over 25 minutes for this debate, so I feel like we should probably round it off there. And
can I ask one last? I just ask one last question quickly. It's just a quick question to both of you. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, don't worry.
You know the World Cup's being expanded to more teams.
Yes.
Do you think that's a good thing?
I personally do.
Do you, Alex?
The World Cup being expanded to good teams, yes, but it's not. Yes, but I don't think it's parallel because it's not at the expense of any of the other teams.
No, but I think it's because it's. I guess you're saying the more lesser teams that are in it. Your argument would be that the more prestigious is, but I think I certainly agree that I think the World Cup is an international tournament, and I think the more diversity, the more international diversity we have, the better. But sorry, go on.
But wow, I'm surprised to hear you praising international diversity.
Wow.
But yeah,
you know when Alex said that Brexiteers don't get called racist and xenophobic. Well,
let's take a joke.
You weren't joking, but anyway.
Right, we need to put a lid on this debate now. Both very good arguments on both sides, but let us know what you make of the situation in the comments down below. Do you think that the Champions League should just be for the champions, or do you prefer it the way it is now? Like I said, let us know in the comments. Leave a like, share the video, and subscribe to In the Dugout, your home of the beautiful game. This has been Chris, Josh, and Alex. Thank you for watching.